Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast, the self-development podcast for women who want more. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien. I'm a no-nonsense life coach, a seasoned entrepreneur, photographer, rescue dog mum, and women's empowerment champion. Each week, I share self-development strategies, amazing guest interviews, and uplifting conversations that will help you up-level all areas of your life. Let's dive in. Hi, folks. Welcome to episode 18, season 2 of the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. Today, my guest is Katie Rossler, and we're talking about how your romantic relationships will often be a mirror for the personal work that we need to be doing. First, a bit about my guest. Katie has been a relationship counselor and a coach for 15 years to high-achieving couples. She supports couples to develop the relationship they vision for their future. And this can mean helping them rebuild their relationship or separating whilst still remaining friends. Katie has authored 2 books and is the host of the Balance Code for High Achievers podcast. Welcome to this podcast, Katie.
Thank you, Emma. I loved having you on mine, and I'm really grateful that I get to be on yours now.
Yes, it's wonderful. And I'm really excited for this conversation today. I love all things inner work and self-development work. And I think learning in my own life, learning from my own triggers in relationships has been really profound. And it's been a catalyst for some enormous inner work and kind of quantum leaping my progress as a human. I think that's what we're all doing with inner work, really, isn't it? It's being better people. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Can you kick us off from your experience? In what ways do our partners reflect the stuff that we need to work on?
Oh, goodness. Yes, that's a great starting question. So what I find, not only in the work that I do, but in my personal relationship, and I've been with my husband for 15 years, we've been married for 11, is that often the things that annoy us the most about our partners, the things that really get under our skin, is a reflection of something we're unhappy about in ourselves. So for example, let's say my husband comes home and he's, on his phone a lot and he's like barely responding, and I just start to get really annoyed with him. And this becomes like a repeating pattern, right? What I've found is when I have this major annoyance versus like, hey, can you just put away the phone? But I'm like really aggravated. When I do the self-reflection of where in my life am I trying to escape and avoid, I will find the areas that I am like, ooh, you are a mirror to me right now. And when I work with couples, they'll start to share, oh, it annoys me so much. This person, my partner's doing this and they're so messy and they're so this and that. And we would have usually just finished a conversation about their own stuff in their work life, in their friendship life, with their family of origin, something going on. And I'll be like, wow, this sounds like what we just talked about, but you're seeing it from somebody else doing it, right? And they're like, oh my God, you're right. It's the mirror effect, because I love to call it the mirror effect. We can always see the issues other people have way clearer than our issues. So I like to view our relationship with our romantic partner as a really good kind of looking glass to what work we need to be doing. And I find this even in our families, right? Like if our parents annoy us, if our adult siblings start to annoy, like even our cousins or whatever, aunts and uncles, usually there's something they're doing that we either harbor some resentment because they have the freedom to say what they want to say, or act the way they want to, or not have to work so hard or whatever, right? Or there is a reflection of something we're upset about within ourselves. So that whole system can really work to benefit you if you'll look at it through that lens. If you'll go, man, I am so pissed off at you all the time lately about this. Where in my life am I reflecting something similar? And what is it I'm upset at myself about, really?
Yeah, and I think it's so many things in there. I think it's so powerful. Triggers are wonderful teachers, and it's one thing I found. And I think sometimes there's an opportunity when something's triggering you to be able to communicate a need more effectively. Because I think often in relationships, whether it's romantic relationships or work relationships or friendships, often deep problems arise when we don't speak our truth.
Yeah.
And it's an invitation to say to somebody, actually, this isn't okay for me. And what came to mind when you were talking about a partner being on a phone all the time is there's also an element of where do I do that I shouldn't do, which I think is the last place we look. So I think this is where the work you do is so powerful, is also what need is not being met or what old wound is being stamped on. Because what sprung to mind when you were talking was, for me, I would feel like I was being ignored and I'd feel like I wasn't important.
Yeah.
And I think there's also work to have a look at voicing what you need instead from your partner, calmly saying, when you are on your phone all the time, I feel like I don't feel loved. I feel like I'm ignored. I don't feel like I'm a priority. And I think often then having a look at, okay, where does that come from? And where is there some really deep work to do to heal that old wound?
Definitely. Like, where am I ignoring myself right now? Where am I not showing myself that same respect? Where am I not looking at myself honestly and openly? And that's where we start to realize, wow, there's some old wounds there. There are some
Yeah.
pieces there. Because think about it, in the areas of your life where you're the most confident and calm, if someone does something to you, even your partner, it'll be like, but you won't be like, God, you are not fulfilling my needs, because they're already fulfilled. There's not an issue. But when somebody kind of sandpapers up against a wound, it opens it back up.
Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. Like, hey, I feel like I'm being ignored. Where have I felt this before in the past? And how am I doing it right now to myself?
Yeah. And I think often, I think it's something women do in particular, is hoping somebody will notice that they're feeling like they're being ignored. I think
Yeah.
as women, and I say this because it's a journey I've been on in my own life in multiple places, is we often wait for somebody to pick up that we're
Hmm.
upset rather than saying, hang on a minute, I'm actually feeling very upset right now. Please, could you put the phone away?
Yeah.
I need some of your time and attention. And doing that rather than sitting and festering, it's hard. And I'm sure, you can talk more about this communication piece. Is I think women find it very hard to ask for what they want, is
Hmm.
one thing. And I think sometimes we expect our partners to mind read and
Yeah.
then get upset when they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always teach my clients that we have basically three ages, right? We have like our biological age, we have kind of our IQ number that kind of creates sort of an age as well, right? And then we have our emotional intelligence age. And a majority of us were not modeled healthy emotional intelligence. I mean, that's why it's so big to discuss right now in the workplace, in families, in relationships, personal growth is, oh, build your emotional intelligence, because we didn't have it already developed. So we have to set realistic expectations of our partner too, to say, what age is their emotional intelligence? Not to, belittle them, not to create contempt of like, I'm better than you, I've worked on my emotional intelligence, but to say, you meet things emotionally like maybe a 13 or 14-year-old. Until you work on that, I can't expect you to mind read. I don't know a 13-year-old who reads my mind. No, right? Like, oh, I should be more caring and considerate. But we see them physically looking a certain age and intellectually being a certain age and going, well, you should get this. You should figure it out. We don't do those things too. I can think of so many times in my own marriage where I have dropped the ball emotionally for my husband because I was in my own mind and doing my own thing. And I've done a
Mm.
lot of emotional intelligence work. So there's a component of us giving our partner grace and having realistic expectations. Just
Yeah.
like we do for ourselves often, right? We'll justify the heck out of why we didn't do something. But as soon as they start doing it, we won't take that excuse. It's like, no, no, no. So yeah, there is this piece of, we can't expect anyone to mind read. And we have to deal with the uncomfortability of speaking our truth and what we need. I will say though, Emma, I find often people don't actually know what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Because it'll be like, I need more help. I need more, I need you to show up more. Well, in what way? How? You should just know. Why should I have to tell you what you, right?
Yep.
But then they show up, and I do this with couples. I'll be like, well, but she showed up. You said show up more. She showed up, but not the way I wanted. Okay, but you weren't specific. So when you leave it vague, they get to interpret. right? They get to
Mhm.
decide. If there is something you really want, even if they've known you for 20 years, I don't care. Say, I want this. You don't have to
Mhm.
add, what I want, and I've always been this way. Okay, cool. That doesn't help. I want you to give me a hug and a kiss when you leave the house every day, even if you've got so many other things on your mind. Like that's what I need from you. And
Yeah.
then if they forget it and they don't do it, give them that period of like, hey, I'm just reminding you. And then that's a discussion if they keep ignoring that. That's a different discussion. But
Yeah.
be okay saying what you need and take some time to figure out what that is. I often have had really heated discussions with my husband, and he'll be like, it's like, well, what is it you need from me? And I'm like, I don't know, because I hadn't thought that part through. I just thought
Yeah.
about the pain and the frustration and the like, you annoy me because you do this. And then it's like, you're right. How would I want this? Well, I'd want you to stop doing that. But logically, what do I really need? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want you to stop this. And instead, I'd like you to do this.
Yeah.
And I think often we can get stuck, can't we, in the negative part of what we don't want. And I love that you brought up that actually people don't know what they need, because in my life coaching practice, people will come to me with, like you've said, they know what they want to stop, that they want
Yep.
what they don't want to do. They don't want this job. They don't want this. But when you say, okay, well, where are we going and what do you want instead? They might have an idea of what they want, but they've told themselves they can't actually have that.
Yes.
It's not
Yep.
possible for me. And I
Yep.
think sometimes we can get almost a bit addicted to the misery. It's easier to whinge than it
Yeah.
is to make a big change. And obviously in couples, we need to be making changes in tandem with our partner. You can't have one partner doing all the work and the other one not doing it, because it's a bit of a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, very true. This is a big reason when I started working with couples, I was really adamant. My first training in couples work was like, you only work with the couple, not the individuals. That can make it really challenging for you. But now the way I work with couples, I say at least one session I have to have with each of you individually, because I need to see where you are on your personal growth journey. I need to see what are the things maybe you don't want to say to your partner because you're embarrassed, you feel shame or guilt, and they're holding you back. Maybe there's stuff at work you don't want to scare them and make them nervous about, but you're willing to tell me, and I'm going to keep it confidential unless it's like, this really will impact the
Yeah.
relationship. So it becomes a little more of a personal growth journey for the individual. And then as the couple, a relationship development journey.
Mm.
And I just remind them that often how we built the foundation of our relationship just needs to, it's already faulty, right? It's already cracked and having issues. Like, let's just remove all that and let's start fresh, because now you've learned so much more. And there's old habits and there's things from our past and things from our family generationally that we don't want to do anymore. So why don't we start fresh? And yes, that means growing pains. And that means, oh, I fell into the old habit. Now I need to take ownership and get back into the new habit. But why not? Like, why not do that work? It helps you grow as a person, and then it helps you with the relationship. And when you introduced me, you shared, sometimes I help couples just separate and say, we're not
Yeah.
actually going to make this work. That's okay too. But you won't know that if you're not being the person you would want to be in your ideal relationship. Like, if you're
Yeah.
not acting the way you want to be, then don't expect your partner to change and don't expect the relationship to change. And that is tough love. And I say that as a woman who really has had to do the work, because I'm very good at being like, I'm walking away from this. Forget it. I don't want to do the work. This is too much work. It's too hard. And I
Mhm.
realized that's my generational family pattern. That's not me. I
Mm.
want to show up every day and be like, okay, I'm getting a little bit better at being more patient with you. I'm getting a little bit better at sharing what I need. I'm getting a little bit better at being more connecting in the way you want to connect, just not the way that I want to connect, right? And then I can go more logically, do I want to walk away from this or not?
Yeah.
Because I'm being the person I want to be for whatever future relationship then that might show up.
Yeah, and I think that leads me to my next question of lots of people jump from one relationship to another
Yeah.
when the going gets tough. But I think there is the fine line, and it's something that can often happen. I know from my own experience, because I've been presented with it, is often in my own relationships, I've got to a point where the going has got really tough and I've gone, cheers, thanks for playing, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And I don't regret. I've done that twice. I don't regret doing it. The second time, the relationship was, yeah, I was in a relationship with, shall we say, an overgrown child.
Hmm.
And if I look back compassionately about it, this man had a terrible sort of fatherly modeling,
Hmm.
and he hadn't realized he'd stepped in. He told me his father was foul, but he'd stepped into playing the exact same role and hadn't noticed. And I
Wow.
think it's a problem when people don't have that self-awareness.
Yep.
And I was reflecting before this podcast, because it's such a powerful question. When do you keep doing the work?
Yeah.
And when are you gaslighting yourself into, if I keep doing the work, something might change? Because I think
Hmm.
for this particular man, I mean, it was I was frightened of him. So that's
Yeah.
never good to be frightened of somebody. Um, could it have been worked on in therapy? I don't know. Do I
Right.
regret leaving? Do I regret leaving the relationship? Absolutely not, because it was the wrong thing. But I think when we start to talk about relationships reflecting back the inner work you need to do, sometimes people jump ship, like you've said, when the going gets tough, when it is a large speed bump that could be worked through. But sometimes it really is never going to work. So how do
Yeah.
we know about that? Because it's a very nuanced line in the sand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and I think as you step back and reflect at the relationship, you could say like, "Hey, I didn't feel safe. That should have been, bloop, bloop, yep, mayday,
Oh
mayday,
yeah,
ship is going
big
down."
red flag.
Right? Right?
Yeah,
Totally.
yeah,
So there are certain things, if you and I were in session, I'd be like, like give me the lowdown in each of those relationships. Let's see what were the similarities and what were the growth lessons for you. What were the things that you were working through? Because sometimes we're attracted to the same person in different forms. And that's a reflection of what is it we need to be working on within ourselves. So if you find you're kind of hopping from relationship to relationship and it gets hard at a certain point, what's happening? What are the signs? Are you gravitating to the unhealthy, scary, but super charismatic and seems so wonderful extrovert, right? Like whatever it might be. So look at those things. And let's say right now you're not in a relationship and you're listening to this. Write down what are like if you were kind of the consultant of your relationships. Okay, and this one, this is what happened, this is how they were. And this one, this is what happened, and this is how they were. And then to the side of it, and this is how I was. Were you more quiet and meek? Were you really aggressive and outspoken? Were you like what shifted and changed? Because the only way for us to learn is to kind of watch the movie of those relationships play out and go, what really happened? And sometimes we need that time and distance to be able to have that. But how you're asked, like, how do you know when it's time to go versus like, I'll just keep working on me? The more you work on you, it should naturally change the system. If you think of cogs in a wheel, when one starts to turn the other way, the others kind of fight against it, but eventually they'll change. That is how
yeah.
any healthy running system works.
Mm.
If I, in my relationship, started to say, like a certain colloquial phrase in America, right? My husband's German. If I started saying I'm trying to think something in the South, we would say like, um, gosh darn it. If I said gosh darn it a whole bunch over a week, I would be really surprised if the following week or two, my husband didn't want to say gosh darn it because the system has changed in our communication. And I have started to say that. I have 3 kids. If I start to say something within 3 days, they're saying it too, right? Like systems change. So you start to shift how you communicate, how patient you are, speaking your needs, right? And if within a month or two you're not seeing more awareness in them, more self-reflection, or a tantrum, them fighting back because you're changing the
Mm-hmm.
system, then that's red flags. So you either want the tantrum because you're like, you're feeling it. I'm gonna be consistent, keep going. I know I'm doing it right, right? Or, ooh, you're changing for the good and you're kind of mirroring what I'm doing, great. But if they're just baseline staying the same, you're not seeing any shift either way.
Mm-hmm.
That right there to me is a good clear cut sign. But you got to be doing it for a couple weeks, couple months of like consistent. I don't mean like I was good for a day and then 5 days of being, absolute jerk to you. No, but you got to be really consistent. That's where you already are making the big changes within yourself and the shifts. And then you can say, our relationship is not, moving smoothly. And then you can present that to them if you want to, or you can make the decision on your own, or you come to someone like me who you say, hey, I really think this isn't working. I'd love your perspective, right? I'd love to kind of see what you think. And then from there, you can make an educated decision. But I always like to make decisions from a really calm, collected place. And that doesn't mean they can't be emotional, because there can be like no, I'm leaving, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you just feel this calm. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And when you feel irritated, when you feel annoyed, when you feel hurt, when you feel scared, any of these things, these emotions are the flags of pay attention. And then you can sit down and reflect. Is this about me? Is the mirror effect happening? Is there something in them that they're changing and I don't like? Do they have some addiction issues? Do they have, I work with a lot of couples where it's like, yeah, and just in the last couple of years, especially post-COVID, like he's starting to struggle with addiction. And it's like, okay, let's talk about that, because that will damage not only the foundation of your relationship, but any future.
Yeah.
And that can be a time to say, I have to walk away, because the journey that partner's going to go on of the roller coaster with addiction, you can choose not to go on it. You can choose that, right? But at the end of the day, I think it goes back to, a lot of us were raised with sort of the Disney, you meet your knight in shining armor or the princess and you get married and live happily ever after. And that's just not how it works. We know this
Yeah.
logically, but emotionally, we're still looking for kind of that savior or that person to protect. And those are old stories that we have to let go of, so we can start to find those really healthy people we want to be with.
Yeah, I said this on one of my other podcasts as well. Disney has an awful lot to answer for.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I mean, for the expectations that are set up, and I think it's, if I mean, I'm 43 now, so grew up with proper patriarchal Disney
Absolutely.
movies where the prince comes in and rescues the princess, and you're right,
Yeah.
it subconsciously sets up, this is what a relationship is.
Yes.
And then I think for me, it's been the two other long-term relationships I've had. God, what a disappointment. Prince really didn't show up very well
Right?
at all. But then I don't think the prince knew what he was supposed to do. And we were the guy I was saying that I was frightened of. Look, that was, if I look back on that now, I'd come out of a marriage. He was coming out of a marriage. I mean, the foundation of it was a disaster. And there were red flags from the get-go. But I'd been in a marriage that I felt very lonely in. And this guy I thought was the complete opposite of
Yeah.
my ex-husband. Um,
He
some
needed
ways,
you.
yes.
He needed you. Yeah.
Some ways, no.
Yeah.
So, and I think the thing is here is you have got to choose yourself when it comes to making a decision about staying or leaving a relationship. But I think you have to choose yourself from a place of self-awareness,
Yeah.
and you have to know yourself really well to like you've said, been able to make a calm choice of, I've done everything I can do. This isn't working for me anymore. Because the one thing that popped into my head while you're talking is it can be very easy to get into a cycle of doing self-development work in the hopes that the person you're with changes. And then
Right.
it becomes a little bit manipulative,
Yep.
I think.
Yep. This is that piece where it needs to be about you being the person you want to be in the ideal relationship you want to have. That's the
Yeah.
focus. Knowing that the system should change. So you're going to be the best version of you. You're going to show up where you look in the mirror and go like, yeah, I kicked ass as a partner today.
Yeah.
And then the hope is, and usually the shift comes where they start to fight against the system because you're changing. And I like to joke, sometimes we've given our partner like the king size bed at the Hilton and filet mignon every night. And now we're making them have ground beef and sleep maybe on the floor. And it's, things are shifting and they're not going to like that. But then you find a healthy compromise. It's okay. But if those things aren't shifting, then you have to show up as the person you want to be, that you want to look at every day in the mirror. And that, I think many of us didn't have moms who did that,
Oh,
or
yeah.
women in our lives who did that, right? Because
Yeah.
they didn't know to do that. They weren't generationally shown to do that. And, you were talking about Disney, um, 40 years old, same. I grew up in a Southern Baptist in the America family and a Catholic family. I had both sides. So I had a lot
Wow.
of conditioning around what a wife is allowed to do or be, or around
Yes.
sex and what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh my gosh, right? So there's so much deconditioning. Like, how can I show up as the partner I want to be in my ideal relationship if I don't face all of that? It has nothing to do with my husband, does it? Right? That
No.
has nothing to do with him. So I shouldn't make it about him. I got to do
Mhm.
my work so
Mm.
that I can be that partner and hope that by doing that, by having those conversations, like when I'll tell my husband, man, I realized the other day, like my parents used to have discussions about this, and that makes me think this, he'll be like, oh, wow. Oh my gosh, I realized like my parents used to have, like it makes him think.
Yes.
And then he'll start to share, and that's a beautiful conversation we can have. And then it's like, how do we hold each other accountable to not repeat that with our kids? Like, how do we not
Yeah.
pass this on? So you have to talk about what you're doing too, but it's being consistent in the change as well.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I found really powerful on my own self-development journey is learning to be able to listen to your partner, not criticize you to an, I use the word criticism, give you feedback,
Yep.
however much that stings a little bit, to be
Yeah.
able to listen to it and take it on board without firing back on the defensive. And I
Right.
think that's been for me and my husband, that has been a game changer
Yeah.
in learning to shut up
Yeah.
and realize that you might not want to hear what's been said, but if you want to have a relationship that blossoms and grows, as much as you expect to be able to voice your feelings and say, when you do X, I feel Y, please do Z instead,
Yep.
it's a two-way street. And
Yeah.
one has to learn to take it on board and kind of say, yeah, I might not necessarily agree with that, but I'm going to be quiet in the moment rather than escalating this by bouncing it back. Because sometimes we do need somebody else to reflect back. If you want your partner to change, you also have to be prepared to look at where you might be less perfect. It's a little bit difficult, I know, but sometimes you have to be aware that you've also perhaps got some work to do to meet their needs as well that you might not agree with.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I find this too, we're both entrepreneurs. If I present to my husband, I have this great idea, I'm going to do this masterclass series and I'm going to teach this and I'm going to do that. And he starts asking questions, just logical questions.
Don't ask those logical questions.
Is this going to be free? And what is the ROI? And I get so reactive. But what I've realized, and this is with any dream we have, is that if I haven't sat down and really thought about the dream and the logic of it so that I'm confident in this decision I'm making, then I'm not going to be okay with the questions. But if a coach asked me those questions, if my friend asked me those questions, if a fellow business person said, hey, tell me, okay, so what are you thinking about this? So you want to do it for free or you want to do I'm much more open. It's because it's my partner.
Mm-hmm.
So if I will just be quiet and listen to those questions and go, I don't feel like I'm emotionally in the right state to answer this right now without getting snarky, but I know you're asking me some questions I need to think about. Let me come back to you. Let's just halt this conversation. I'll come back to
Yeah,
you when I'm ready. Then I have way more productive conversations with him. He's
yeah.
not asking me anything that's unreasonable, and he's not saying
Mm.
anything somebody else wouldn't say to me, but it's because it's him, and he's not cheerleading me on and ready to like jump into, on the rainbow with me and go, let's just see where it takes us. I get upset. So
Yeah,
you're right. We have to stop and listen and also go, am I overreacting because I want, him or her to respond a certain way, and I
mm-hmm.
want them to be that's not logically how they are, like
Yeah.
realistic expectations again, right? Like that's just
Yes.
not who they are. Well, then I need to stop sharing my pearls amongst, him or her until
Yeah.
I'm really ready and confident to say these are the best pearls I have and I know why. Here you
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. Two things in there I want to mention, and that is, I think often, I mean, we're two women, straight women married to men, so I'm using this example,
Yeah.
is men often want to fix things. I'm
Mhm.
married to an engineer, he fixes things for a
Yep.
living. So sometimes I have to flag up, I just need you to listen to me. I don't need a solution. I
Yep.
just need to vent a little bit, and I just need you to empathize with me. That's all I need right now. And it's okay to voice that with a partner, because I think if you're quite triggered by something that's happened externally and you actually just want to listen, sometimes men need to know that that's what they need to do. That's what's required of them. They don't need to step in and
Yep.
fix it. The other thing that you said, which I think is really powerful, and I want to flag it up, is you talked about when you were sharing ideas with your husband and he asked you questions and you got quite reactive, is it's okay to push pause on a conversation sometimes. I think this is something that people forget. If you are flooded with emotion and it's starting to escalate and you think it's going to hit into an argument or you're going to say something you shouldn't, it's perfectly okay to say, I need 5 minutes. I need 24 hours. I need to push pause on this. I need a bit of space. And I think this is something everybody forgets is you can't have a constructive conversation with any other human if the pair of you are in like massively heightened in a stress response.
Yep.
And the only way you resolve something is by both of you sitting down calmly and being able to listen and to hear and listen and give each other space to talk. And that only happens in a space of neutrality. I don't
Yep.
think anything good comes from two people being really, really fired up. But we're not taught this. And like you've talked about not having great parenting models. I mean, you've from a very conservative religious
Mhm.
background. I'm sure you didn't see any women voicing their needs,
Yes.
particularly in that space. And the same, I've had a similar. My mum is a big people pleaser, and I also didn't really have it modeled that it's okay to calmly voice what you want.
Mhm.
The dynamic with my parents was my mum would get very het up, very, very upset, and my dad would just couldn't deal with, just stop crying. And I had it growing up.
Yeah.
If I got upset, stop crying, you sound like your mother. And,
Mm.
yeah, difficult. It's a difficult thing to kind of deal with and process through.
Yep.
And then you end up learning to sort of tuck everything away. Whole other conversation. But I think
Yeah.
it's a reminder for folks listening that the point you've just made and what we've just talked about is it's perfectly okay if you feel yourself that stress response rising, you feel yourself getting very triggered and you can't cope with a conversation. It's perfectly okay to say to the other person, I actually can't cope with this conversation right now.
Yep.
I'm struggling. I'm not going to be able to think clearly. Can we come back to this? Can I go for a walk for a minute? Can I go out? I need a bit of space.
Yep. And always return and have the conversation, because what
Yes.
happens is you get a list of built up, we still need to finish that conversation. We still need to
Yeah.
finish that conversation. And really what you're doing is avoiding. So if you say, I'll be back in 20 minutes, set your alarm, be back in 20 minutes, and
Yes.
vice versa, right? Your partner gets the right to do that too. But walking out of the room and slamming the door, that doesn't go anywhere. So
No.
we often mirror, like you said, we often mirror what our parents did, or even sometimes the opposite of what we saw our parents
Yeah.
do. And that's that emotional intelligence piece of where we've got to do the work and we've got to be more self-aware, both parties, right? In
Yeah.
the relationship of, I don't want to keep doing that. How do I start to shift this? And I think that piece is crucial.
Yeah. So powerful. Katie, this has been such a wonderful, I feel like we could continue probably for about another 2 hours. Such a powerful conversation and so many reminders in here about noticing what your partner triggers in you to as an invitation for where you can do
Yeah.
some work, starting to choose yourself and really getting to know yourself so you know what you want to choose, you know yourself, and communicating really effectively with your
Yeah.
partner, and for it to be okay for you to voice your needs in a relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You have a relationship quiz that people can do online. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, what that involves, what people are going to get out of that, and how they
Yeah.
access that?
Yeah, definitely. So it's an assessment rather than a quiz. And you book a call with me, each of you individually, because I find that we alter how we answer questions when our partner is right there. right? They're like, oh, honey, well, what would you say about this? And it's like, no, I want to know what you think. So both of you get a complimentary call with me. It usually lasts about 30 minutes, and we look at 7 core areas of your relationship. And I have you really give me your point of view on it and what would create the ideal scenario of it shifting. And then we talk about goals to make that happen. I love doing them. It's so fascinating to see how the interconnection between trust and respect and connection and intimacy. If we don't trust our partner to get things done in the day to day, not about the big, like, oh, they'll have an affair, but like, if I tell you to do this, are you going to remember kind of thing? Then we start to respect them less and we start to parent them and we talk to them differently. And then from there, we don't feel like connecting because who wants to do that when you feel like a parent? So all of these things, but when you do this assessment, you start to see these patterns come out, and it's something I can reveal to you, like, hey, do you notice this? And it's like, oh my God, that's it. And then from there, you can, decide if the program I have for couples and individuals makes sense for you and your partner. And I love, again, helping couples rebuild. So, but everyone has to go through this level 10 relationship assessment to see where are they, what makes sense as far as support, or do they feel like they're quite confident in where they are?
Amazing. And where do people find that, Katie?
Yeah, so it's katierossler.com/relationship dash assessments. I'll make sure you've got the link for the show notes.
Magic. I'll put that in the show notes. And then where can folks connect with you on socials?
Yeah, so Instagram I'm quite active on. That's just katie.rossler, and you don't have to do the O with the funny dots, just O normal. You can find me on Facebook as well, Katie Rossler, or LinkedIn, Katie Rossler LPC, which stands for Licensed Professional Counselor.
Brilliant. I'll put all of those in the show notes so folks can come and get in touch with you. Katie, this has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you for being with me today. I've got a lot out of it, and I'm sure everybody listening has too.
Thank you, Emma. I enjoyed our talk.
Thank you for being with us today, folks. I will see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please leave me a 5-star rating and a review, and make sure you share this episode with a friend who you know will also enjoy it. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. Please drop me a DM and say hi at Emma O'Brien Coach. And for more information about coaching with me, please head to my website, which is emmaobrien.coach.com.